Welcome back to One Comic Book a Day, where we're covering Adventure Comics 140, Journey to the Moon. And by the title's suggestion, this is somewhat inspired by a Jules Verne story, but it has more in common with, say, the B movies based on Jules Verne's books that came out around like the 50s to the 70s that would star like Doug McClure. You don't know who Doug McClure is, I guess ask your grandparents? I barely know who Doug McClure was. I mainly know him as who they were making fun of with Troy McClure on The Simpsons. Actually, but he was one of two people they were making fun of. That's why his name was combined. We don't need to get into that. But weren't particularly very good movies. They were kind of fun to watch. A matinee, though, if you were a kid. So, as the title suggests, they're going to go to the moon. A absent-minded professor, which is how a lot of those movies actually functioned, built a rocket, and him and Clark are going to end up on the moon by accident. There were other kids around, but they end up there by accident. The conflict of the story is Clark trying to keep him alive using his Superman, well, here, Superboy powers. By the way, this absent-minded professor, I'm worried about him. I think he might have a degenerative brain disease by how bad his memory is. And well, the effectiveness of the story kind of falls apart because, once again, they care more about the quantity of action set pieces or things for Superboy to do than quality. They are dealing with problems that Superboy essentially solves within a minute, making them feel like a breeze. Like less than a page, sometimes even a panel, he solves the problems. And there's actually not a lot of obstacles for him to go through. He punches meteors on the way up there. And then, well, there's no other problem with getting up there or coming down. The comic sort of sells on the cover page an idea that there's going to be a whole bunch of Superboys, and it does deliver there. I was disappointed because there is no actual fight between him and all these other Superboys, but the cover actually never promised that, and the title page, well, it's just Superboy straddling a rocket, which he also didn't do. So this thing actually delivered on nothing it promised me. But that's not actually what's disappointing about that. These Superboy copies, duplicates, replicas, are just simple single-cell organisms that can apparently just shape change into Superboy. And all they really do is just argue over being Superboy. And by arguing, I mean they just yell, "I'm Superboy," and "I'm Superboy." They don't even disagree with each other. They're just saying, "I'm Superboy." Which leads the professor to figure out that Clark has to be Superboy. I guess that is a conflict that is somewhat interesting to do in this scenario, but what are they going to do with it? Absolutely nothing. Because you see, as I mentioned, he's absent-minded and he cannot remember if Clark's name is Clark. Though, one last thing while they're up there, while Clark goes down to save a bus that's about to go off a cliff, it's pretty random, but it's actually a pretty good idea for some sort of actual obstacle for him to deal with. He has to fly back to the Earth real quickly while the professor is being attacked by a giant red furry aardvark monster that seems to exist on the moon. So while Superboy is hanging out saving that bus, he has to get back to save the professor really quickly. That's actually something interesting for Superboy to do. Unfortunately, it's only about a page, and essentially it's just depicting Superboy pushing the bus back up and then immediately just punching this thing into outer space, like off the planet, floating in gravity. Pretty awful, actually. He also defaces the moon again. Though, technically, this would be the first time he defaces the moon. He defaces the moon quite often. Okay, I can only name 2 times, but that is way too many times. That is not the Doofenshmirtz reference, but it's still a lot of times. That's closer. So back on the planet, the professor is going to announce to the world who Superboy is. Why he's going to do this, and why it needs to be a professor to do this, But it's an interesting little conflict, and Superboy absolutely does nothing to stop him. Luckily, if you remember the fact that he's absent-minded, he cannot remember who Superboy is, which almost makes up for this whole story, but there is sort of a problem here that, hey, anybody who thinks this through, like all the other classmates of Clark's, who knew he went up there with Clark, maybe could put 2 and 2 together. I guess you can argue that they wouldn't be able to figure out that going up there with Clark is what led to him discovering who Superboy is. Could have just been a discovery he made at any time. But I think there's some problem solving here that could lead you to the right answer. But it is a very weak way to get out of what was maybe the strongest conflict that the comic had. And man, it was really seeking some sort of conflict. So it's a fairly weak story with not a lot actually going on for it. Even what it sort of promises doesn't really make for much conflict, and the one big sort of conflict it does drum up gets solved almost immediately. It was never a problem to begin with. That is it from Adventure Comics 140. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, hit the bell icon to get notifications when new video goes up. I do this Monday through Friday, but Fridays is Bat Friday, where we cover a Batman story, neither Detective Comics or Batman. And until next time, let's ponder the question, whatever did happen to the boy of tomorrow? What happened to this absent-minded professor? There's just so many smart people, professors, doctors, and stuff running around Metropolis or Smallville that really need to be watched. Needs to be some sort of government list for these guys. They're creating time travel machines and knocking Superman back. Someone needs to stop them. Okay, have a great day.